the message that just because you may have this disability and that's prevalent in your life doesn't mean that it ever has to hold you back, and doesn't mean that you can't reach your goals just as much as anybody else can. So I think it's going to be really inspiring, as has been said there in the chat. You're also lovely in the chat, thank you. It's Yeah, it's going to be just so great and so inspiring to hear from so many different people from so many different walks of life, which is why it's so important that each and every one of you are here, because you all bring something unique to the table. We're all going to learn something here tonight. And I think that's just a really important component of it too. I've even learned that from being on the committee for Sharing Our Strengths. You know, there are so many people who are part of this movement for so many different reasons. Obviously, for those of you who don't know me, I am a wheelchair user. And I'll talk more about that later on. But obviously, my disability is very physical, so it's obviously very noticeable. Whereas some people have invisible disabilities and you may not even realize that they have a disability. So I think it's so important to hear those stories as well. That, you know, that not every disability just fits under the stereotypical, you know, blue and white wheelchair emblem that you use as an emoji, you know. There's so much more to it. And there's so much that you can achieve with or despite a disability. So that's my little welcome spiel. I don't know whether Jessie wants to come in and say something as well before we get properly started. But I'm so looking forward to hearing all your stories, and thank you so much for being a part of this. It really means so much to us.
Absolutely beautiful introductions. I'd love to invite Hannah now to introduce herself next, if that's cool.
Yeah, of course. So, hi everybody. My name is Hannah Kelly. I'm the Get Ahead coordinator at Ahead. There's a lot of familiar names, so I think maybe some of you have maybe been at workshops of mine before, or have been on panels actually as speakers for me before. So it's great to see you all again, or here really in the chat. So yeah, I work for Ahead. So we're a non-profit independent organization that works to create inclusive environments in education and employment for people with disabilities. So delighted to be here tonight and to kind of share our experiences, maybe speak to the experience of a lot of the students that I meet. And yeah, happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So thank you to our lovely panelists for agreeing to come this evening and for joining us. I think it's going to be a wonderful evening, and to all the students who've attended this evening who are going to give their input and maybe share a story or two. We're really grateful to have you here. I'm very excited for the night ahead. I think it will be quite rewarding and very educational. So I've sent several questions to the panelists for this evening. However, I do want you, the students, to feel confident in sending in some questions. So feel free to shoot them to me privately, or you can put them into the group chat and I will ask them as well. If you want to ask something but you don't want to be named, or you want to keep it confidential, do feel free to send it on to me as well. I will be the POC for this evening. So if anything does happen to become triggering, or you do find that you need to take some time to step away, or your mental health is acting up, don't be afraid to shoot me a message. We can have a chat, or I can just know that you're safe and that you're okay leaving this evening. So I would really appreciate that. So whatever, and I'll introduce myself a little bit later on as well when I'm speaking. But I want to hear from these lovely individuals first. So I'm just going to get my questions up and we'll begin. Oh, and just to triple check, can everybody hear okay?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yes, if at any point we lose connection, do let me know. Wonderful, right, so let's begin. What is a bit shitty this evening? Okay, so the first question I had was a brief introduction, so I know you've kind of covered that as well. So Hannah, I was hoping that you might take the time to talk a little bit about Ahead for a few minutes, and maybe how how you got involved, if that's okay.
Yeah, so so as I said, we're a non-profit organization and we work in the areas of employment and education. And we were set up in 1988, so 32 years ago now. It started in UCD by Professor John Kelly. He set up the organization as really a voice for students at that time who there wasn't as many, obviously, and there wasn't really as structured supports as there is now in higher education. But I suppose what we do is broken into three different categories. The kind of access and college stage. So we do a lot of work there with students who have disabilities who are in secondary school. So, you know, making people aware of entry routes like DARE and kind of some information there around supports in college and kind of trying to empower students to make the move into third level or further ed. And then this kind of second part of our work then is in higher education. So myself, the program that I coordinate, which is the Get Ahead program, works with students and graduates directly. So my program works to upskill students and graduates with disabilities into the graduate workplace, really. So, we do a lot of workshops there on like disclosure, so how to disclose a disability in a work setting, and also some information around legislation that's there and kind of supports that are available in college and stuff like that. And then we have the employment side, so we also have a work placement program for graduates with disabilities from level 6 onwards. So graduates can come into that program and they get paid at graduate level placements, and they're supported, and they have a needs assessment process as well. So that's kind of what we do. We work, and there's kind of a bigger picture. Then obviously we do some lobbying. We're involved in some policies, and we release annual statistics of students with disabilities who are registered at higher education, so in third level. So that's kind of a snapshot of what we do. If you're interested in knowing more about what we do, we have a whole website with lots of resources and stuff on it as well. And yeah, that's kind of what we do in a nutshell.
Fantastic, and it sounds absolutely amazing. It sounds like something that a lot of people, especially here, would love to be involved with. And I remember at the Power of Disability conference when I heard about G for the first time, I remember I was quite taken aback, and I definitely wanted to learn a bit more. So hopefully throughout the evening, we'll get like a clearer image and maybe get you a few new graduate employees or a few new volunteers. Fantastic. Now, okay. Next is Leesa. I want you to talk maybe a little bit about the work you do as an activist and speaking out, and possibly, your social medias and whatnot.
Cool. Okay. So as I said earlier, my name's Leesa. For those of you who don't know me or whatever, I run an Instagram called Leesa Blogs. And I started my Instagram around 2017, but it wasn't always a disability page. It wasn't always somewhere where I felt comfortable talking about my disability, I suppose you could say. So my disability is called spina bifida. And for those of you who don't know about spina bifida, it's a purely physical disability. My disability basically only affects me from, say, my knees down. So when I was growing up, I was very much kind of surrounded by an environment that put an awful lot of, say, emphasis on like learning difficulties or, a mental disability. And I never really felt like I belonged in that category, obviously, because I don't have one, but I also found it very hard to be myself, because anytime, I suppose, when disability was mentioned around my peers or people my age, people always jumped to that kind of conclusion, because anyone in my school who had a disability or who had a special needs assistant had a mental disability. So I felt as though I always kind of fell between these two worlds of, being in a mainstream school and mainstream academia. My friends were all people who didn't have disabilities, but also I was kind of half falling into this category that I didn't feel was very well represented. And I suppose any of you know from growing up, when you're a teenager, all you want to do is look like your friends. All you want to do is be like anybody else. And so for me, I couldn't really fall into that category, because obviously I had a wheelchair and a walker and I had all these things that made me that little bit different. And so instead of kind of embracing it growing up, I kind of tried to suppress it, and I tried to make myself out to be super like able and super, like, oh, my disability doesn't matter, doesn't exist. I would do things like, say, for instance, on social media, if there was photographs of me, I'd like, take my walker out of the photo or take my wheelchair out of the photo, or I'd always try and facilitate my life around not showcasing my disability. And I don't really know like what it is. I always say it's not like a light bulb moment. It's not like you wake up one morning and you decide, you know what, I'm going to accept myself now. It doesn't work like that. It's constantly working on yourself. And I think being surrounded by the right people and in the right environment, you learn that just because you have this thing in you that's different, or you live your life in a slightly different way or altered way to those that you're surrounded by, it doesn't mean that your life has to hold you back. It doesn't mean that you can't achieve the same thing as other people. And I really do believe the minute that you start to own that, and the minute that you start to embrace that for what it is, you can start to strive for whatever you want to strive for. And it's a journey, to be honest. It's a work in progress. No one ever accepts themselves 100% all of the time, but you do own the power to achieve that. And I think that there's a great power in that. I then started doing on my vlogs, on my Instagram page, talking about accessibility and making disability less of a taboo subject, I think, because I think from having such able-bodied friends and people who don't have disabilities in my life, I do feel like sometimes people are afraid nearly to broach the topic because they're afraid they'll say the wrong thing or use the wrong terminology or offend somebody who has a disability. And I really want to exonerate that. I really want to make it a more accessible subject in all meanings of the word, so that people can talk about it, people can ask people questions, people can open up that conversation so that it's just another element of life. And I think that discussion panels like this and events like Sharing Our Strengths is so important because of that alone, that people can open up the discussion and they can talk about topics surrounding disability. Because as I always say, anyone who follows me on Instagram, they're sick of me hearing this, but I always say acceptance starts with education. So you can't learn to accept something unless you learn about it. You can't begin to even accept something if you don't know what it is, because if you aren't first educated in it, then how do you know what you're accepting? So I think that education is key in terms of that, and that's what I strive to do on my Instagram, by showing people that just because you have this disability, as I said, it doesn't mean it has to hold you back. So I started that in the last about year to 18 months, kind of talking about my disability more and kind of showcasing it more on my page. And I found it's amazing. I'm absolutely, like, every day I'm still so surprised at the response I get from people. People have been so accepting and so willing to learn, and it's really encouraging. So yeah, so that's my story. That's what I do.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute there. Leesa, thank you so much for sharing. That's absolutely fantastic. And I am a massive fan of the work you do, as you know, #1 fan here. So keep it up. Thank you so much. And, oh, hang on. You're getting a lot of love in the chat there. And then, my love, Laocin, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about your work and how you kind of got started in, starting the society and looking out for students as such.
Okay, so what happened was in 2016 or 17, DCU was on the road towards becoming autism friendly. And it was the start of a 3-year initiative. However, the first autism friendly coordinator, Kat Hughes, found that there wasn't really the student voice and backing to go with it. So she had the idea that perhaps if there was a society for autistic people, that would help them to be able to voice their views and their opinions and have a greater impact on the college. However, when she tried to found it, she couldn't get 20 members. And then when Adam Harris, the CEO of As I Am, who came up with the Autism Friendly University Initiative, tried to do it, he struggled in the same way. So then it was August 2019, and I was in my room, this room actually, and I realized that if I wanted the society to happen, I would need to be the one to initiate it. And I kind of thought, well, I'm not good enough really to start a society or to be a leader or to impact things. But then the idea of a society for people like me, I'm multiply neurodivergent. I have 7 disabilities, which is a lot, but anyway, to start somewhere for people like me, there's no one more qualified than someone who is also disabled. And also, if I don't do it, who will? No one. And if I don't do it now, when will I do it? Never. So I kind of jumped in headfirst, and I got the 20 signatures needed, and I wrote the constitutional aims and had various other things to do, like an activities plan, social media accounts, email accounts. Yeah, well, just one email account. We now have 2, but that's an admin thing. Anyway, that's me.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, and honestly, a big congratulations on getting it set up. I remember hearing you shared a story at, again, the Power of Disability conference, and it really stood out to me. It was really inspiring, and you're an absolute born leader, and I can't wait to see what else you're going to do with it. So following on, thank you. So following on to the next question. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about basically having a disability while trying to get through college, or basically trying to get through higher education. So I know for myself, I think I find this the most challenging. I wasn't, when I was in, I suppose I'll talk a little bit about myself, I suppose I should. When I was in 5th year of secondary school, I tried to drop out of school because I realised that I wasn't like reading properly like the other students were. And I can distinctly remember the first day of 5th year, I just got back from a Debs and I was prefect, and I went in and they asked me to read out the names of all the first years and I couldn't read them. And I remember all the students laughing, and I remember them thinking I was joking and messing, but I wasn't. And I remember that for the first time I felt kind of, I don't know how to put it, I felt so isolated and scared, and I was like, oh yeah, maybe this is funny, but it was so frightening. And from that day I was very afraid to read out again in case it got worse, and of course it did. And then you start into your leaving cert subjects, and they were a lot different to transition year and a lot different to 3rd year, and suddenly I was falling behind on work, and because I couldn't get the work done, I wouldn't go to class, and because I wouldn't go to class, I was falling behind on work, and it was just this endless cycle. And the teachers, pardon me, they basically said, they used to call me in and they said I didn't need to worry because I was so outgoing and I had such a great personality that I'd get by in life without the academic side of things, that I didn't need to do well in the leaving certain things like this, that I had other things going for me, which was lovely to hear sometimes, but wasn't what I needed to hear or wanted to hear. And then I had this one history teacher, and she noticed that I wasn't reading, and she noticed that I was basically being the class clown to try and hide from people. So she called me back on a Friday afternoon, and she kept me there for 3 o'clock until 7 p.m. every Friday for a couple months, and she read with me, and she was noticing things, she was writing down notes, and she, at the end of it, she basically said to me she thinks that there might be a problem, and that she asked if she could put me forward for the school psychologist. So it was 6th year before the psychologist came. She was supposed to come for 3 hours. She ended up coming for 3 weeks. Continuously, I had to meet her for 3 weeks, and she noticed a series of problems, and I had somehow slipped through the radar. So it was a series of things. It ranges from dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, OCD, severe social anxiety, and a few kind of other things that are kind of difficult to for them to have gone through. So this was when I was halfway through 6th year. I eventually got pulled out of certain rooms. I got hoisted into resource. I got all these, suddenly life was changing, and it was really, really difficult to kind of adapt to. I had speakers, readers, I had to speak my leaving cert. It was such a change. So then coming into college, I had lost all confidence. I had lost all ability to think I could do this. I didn't think I'd be able to read. I thought I'd be laughed out of college completely. And I remember for the first few weeks when I tried to go to events, it's like loads of different things, I was vomiting. I'd be in there for maybe 10 minutes, I'd have to run out. I couldn't do it, couldn't look at anyone, couldn't speak. I found it so hard to make friends. And then I started the Philosophy Society in November because I felt like there had to be other students like me. And I was too scared to go to Access or MAP, which are an amazing, amazing part of the college, an amazing society, but I was just so scared. I felt like I had to do it myself or something. So through that, I ended up getting a bit of confidence, and then through the tuition that MAP gave, the extra supports, the readers, and basically working with the lecturers and meeting other students like me, which I hadn't done before, I slowly gained confidence. I slowly began being able to speak to people. I slowly began kind of getting out of my comfort zone, doing things like this, and everything just slowly became. And when I couldn't do the essays, when I couldn't read, instead of being told, well, it doesn't matter, you can go somewhere else or whatever, the lecturers actually adapted the exams for me. So if it was a written paper and I couldn't read, they allowed me to speak it, or they allowed me to use presentations, or they allowed me to use aids. And it just completely changed my life. And now I've gotten to final year, I'm hosting a discussion panel and I'm maintaining a 1-1. So this is just, it's absolutely impeccable for me. And to be here with you, inspiring people, has just changed my life completely. So I'm really, really grateful. And thank you so much for listening to that little anecdote of a story. So moving on, hopefully my story has indicated why I would like to know a little bit about how you experience basically either working with students in college who have disabilities or going through college with a disability. What is it like, and how does it kind of, you know, what are the obstacles that you feel that a student may face or that you may have faced? And Hannah, would you like to go first for that one?
Yeah, so I suppose I've been working for a head now for about a little bit over 3.5 years, and so I've met a fair few students in my time. And what it really boils down to, I think, is a lot of the issues or the barriers that people face is because of a lack of understanding. It's not necessarily that most people don't want to be accessible or make their lectures or their societies or whatever it is accessible or inclusive, but it's just a lack of awareness of what it is to be inclusive or what it is to be accessible. So I think that is kind of at the crux of where the issues can begin. And I suppose some of the ways that we get in ahead, like that we get the student voice right into our work, and so that we can hear those issues on the ground is our Students with Disabilities Advisory Group. So that is a co-chaired group with ourselves and USI, and it's a group of 8 students who are marvelous. I can't even speak highly enough of them. They're absolutely brilliant. And they bring the issues that are on the ground to us at our meetings, and they influence our work. And is something in particular that came up particularly around the whole COVID situation and learning from home was about accommodations from a working from home environment. And there is kind of 2 different elements as well. There's the academic side, and then there's the social inclusion as well, which I think they're 2 very different things. So from the academic side, lecturers understanding that flexibility is key. That's something that's really important, and being able to be flexible in how they deliver lectures or how a person interacts with those learnings as well. So being open to adding supports or simple things like uploading lectures afterwards, or uploading materials that they're going to be using ahead of time so that people can download them and have a scan through or whatever. And then for the social inclusion side, I think that sometimes gets lost behind as well, but it's something I'm quite passionate about, and think when I think back to my time in college, I don't really think about my lectures that I sat in or something that I studied or time spent in the library. I think of my involvement in clubs and societies, and the friends that I made there, but also not just the friendships and the laugh that you had, but the actual skills, transferable skills that you're learning there that really influenced me getting my job in ahead. Because obviously I graduated in 2017 and started working at ahead straight away, and my degree is in journalism. It's nothing to do with what I do in work, but actually it was my extracurricular activities and stuff that kind of gave me the skills to do this line of work. So that's why I'm so passionate about it, because it's not just simply a laugh, which is important too, but it really can give you skills for work, and I can give you lots of different skills like teamwork and whatever, and especially being on a committee. So that's something that I think for students generally to be aware of as well, is by making a club and society that you're running more accessible, it really can make a difference to students' lives as well, and to their development down the road as well in their careers.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm such a big fan of the work, honestly. Leesa, would you like to go next there? Have a little like pattern thing going there.
Perfect. Yeah, so if it's okay, I know you talked a lot there about college, but I kind of want to go back a little bit first, because my kind of journey with academia and disability kind of starts a bit before then. So I think kind of it's important to note as well what I was saying earlier about acceptance starting with education. Education with disability definitely has a long way to go, but it has come quite far. So like I'm 23, so I was born in the 90s. And even when my mom was expecting me and they found out that I was going to have a disability when I was born, that little expectation of what my life was going to be like. There was so little education around would I even live, was a massive thing. And of course now there are people who have even more severe disabilities than mine, and they live full, complete lives, and they achieve amazing, incredible things. And it's all kind of about learning that as you move through life, you know, there are different obstacles, there are different things in your way, but it doesn't mean that it has to completely overtake your life. So for instance, when I was in primary school, they had established a resource learning class, and that was quite a new thing at the time in primary schools. But as I mentioned earlier, like my disability is purely physical, it's not academic at all. So the resource teacher in the school was trying to encourage my parents to put me into this resource class because I was in a wheelchair. And it was this constant battle for all of like junior and I think senior infants as well when I was in primary school of, you know, Leesa doesn't need to be in this, and I was achieving just as well as my peers. I was completely mainstream learning. But I think it was this kind of automatic presumption of, you know, oh, we see a wheelchair, so therefore it must also affect these other elements of your life, which of course is completely not true. So as I kind of mentioned earlier as well, kind of going through secondary school, I did kind of feel like, you know, I was kind of between these two worlds of, you know, being obviously a wheelchair user, but also, you know, living in this world that is essentially built for able-bodied people. And that is the world that we live in. It is like for people who have physical disabilities, and I'm sure academic and learning difficulties as well. We are living in a world that isn't built for us. We're living in a world that we constantly have to adapt ourselves to. And I think that that's why it's so important to educate people, because we need to educate those who aren't affected by disability on how they can make the world a better place for people who do have disabilities. I think what was mentioned there was really prevalent as well about, you know, the social side of college. I think that's definitely one that has really helped to shape me. As you may know as well, like this Sharing Our Strengths event has been run by the Mental Health Society and the Access Society, Maynooth University, and it's definitely through the Mental Health Society and being parts of clubs and societies in college that has definitely helped me to come out of my shell. And to help me to kind of, you know, embrace who I am as a person. So I do really feel that had I not gone to Maynooth, it definitely would have slowed down my development of wanting to be myself and wanting to put my message out there. I do really feel like the few years that I have spent in Maynooth have definitely, and in college in general, have just really helped to shape me in that way. I feel as though like a lot of the times these things are kind of down to who you surround yourself with, and I've been surrounded by such amazing supportive people in Maynooth who are always willing to learn, and if disability even doesn't affect them, they always want to learn how they can help, or like, you know, what, even down to like what's the correct terminology for this, that, or the other. You know, people are so willing to learn. And I think it's just about putting those constructs in place for people to learn and for people to kind of, you know, be educated on you know, as I said, like how they can make life easier for people with disabilities and how they can include them more. And I think that the more we kind of run that message home and the more we kind of put emphasis on that, the more we can make the world accessible for everybody. So I definitely do feel that in terms of my academic journey, college has definitely been the number one kind of support for me, in terms of, you know, embracing my disability and wanting to use it to educate others rather than suppressing it, if that makes sense.
Takes me so long to mute. I'm so sorry, but thank you so much. Oh, I feel like a lost puppy or something when I'm like, hi. But thank you so much. And again, this is such a rich insight into something, you know, that is completely new for me. You know, it's a different world altogether, and I know many students might be feeling the same. So again, thank you so much for sharing. And last but certainly not least, Laocin.
Would you mind repeating the question, please?
Oh no. I think I asked, oh God, I'm pretty sure I asked something along the lines of basically just kind of like going through college, like, you know, what it's like for students with disabilities, and maybe like any obstacles that kind of come up for maybe yourself, like on your journey, or possibly for other students you might have worked with.
Okay, so obstacles. I'd say for me, well, I'll talk about myself first and then I'll kind of expand to a more general viewpoint. I wasn't diagnosed with anything unusual until I was 16 years old. And then suddenly I was diagnosed as having autism, dyslexia, and dyspraxia. And then another 2 years passed and I had a significant mood episode, which led to me being diagnosed with generalized anxiety and bipolar. And somewhere in there, I got diagnosed with migraines and with an abnormality in my MRI scan called white hyperintense lesions. So, first lot of diagnoses came at 16, but before they had come, I kind of defined myself by my academics because I had very low self-esteem and like how I looked, and I was terrible at sports. So all that was really left was, well, if I can't look good and I can't play sports to save my life, but I've always been reasonably good at shapes, and I can kind of get my head around most numerical things, that means I must be kind of one of the brainy ones. So I spent completely excessive amounts of time on homework. And in primary school, it was bad because I didn't develop social skills or friendships. And it was okay because in primary school, you have such little expectations on how long to spend on homework that when I spent 3 or 4 times as much time as was expected, I still had time to like rest. But then when I came to secondary school, I would like get up at 7 in the morning, you know, go on the train up to school, come back at 5 at night, spend 5 or 6 hours studying, sleep, repeat. And I think really what I struggled with was having a sense of self, because I didn't have labels even for my sexuality at that time or my gender. It was just sort of, I can do maths, that's me, that's all there is to me. And then when I realized that like my language skills weren't up to my mathematical abilities, I used to always think I was kind of average at maths, so therefore I was really severely lacking in linguistic skills and in social skills, obviously, but in kind of areas to do with humanities and writing for long periods of time. So the main obstacle for me was getting diagnosed, really, because once I got diagnosed, I had to, well, theoretically, I had to get supports, but I didn't really get supports in my old school. Then I changed school and I didn't really get supports there because the resource teacher was awful. So when I got to college and I had several diagnosed disabilities at that stage, that's when I started getting supports and I started realizing that I am more than a set of numbers that are, you know, weight, academic results, number of friends, that I'm like a whole person and that no one really can be defined by metrics that work on numbers. So I suppose I'm lucky in many ways because I did manage to get diagnosed. And it took a lot of fighting tooth and nail for it to become an obvious problem, because I learned to mask so well and learned to like cope by spending obsessive amounts of time on homework. So I'd say more broadly though, the disabled community sometimes split themselves into like the officially diagnosed. This is more so a thing with invisible illnesses and disabilities, and then the self-diagnosed. And I think it's really important and valid that people who haven't sought a formal diagnosis or have, but have been discriminated against, which happens due to things like social status, like not being able to afford the 600 euros to go and get a report and get it validated when you know yourself. Like some people, like a reasonable amount of people can't spare that. And then there's also things like there's racism and sexism is very prevalent in diagnosing particularly autism, because it's seen as like the white guy thing. So if you're a girl or you're not white, it's a bit of a minefield. So yeah, I'd say a lot of the obstacles came from the stigma around being disabled, and then me internalizing that and being like, it's not okay to struggle. And then because of that, I put on masks and walls and, you know, I was doing perfectly well, you know? Whereas I think had it been known that there were people who struggled with numbers and there are people who struggled with letters and there are people who have difficulties in social situations, and there are also people who were born with spina bifida. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Probably not. But anyway, if there had been more knowledge and there had been more visibility and it had been commonplace for someone to get a little bit of extra help in spellings, or someone to have headphones on during exams so that they can play the questions out loud rather than have to read it in their head, which is much slower, then that would make life a lot easier. So yeah, the main things are getting the diagnosis, and then if you can't get the diagnosis for whatever reason, then getting the community around it. And that's really what I tried to do with the Neurodivergent Society, and particularly a lot of people in it are self-diagnosed or not diagnosed at all. Like, as in, they don't identify as neurodivergent at all. And it's just a place where you facilitate the needs of everyone. So if there's someone wearing sunglasses inside, you just don't comment on it. It's like the most basic stuff, but we're taught manners in a very strange way in Ireland. So it sometimes doesn't come across. Anyway, so those are the obstacles: diagnosis and acceptance, from my experience anyway.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was like an incredible insight, and it definitely leads way into the next question, which is surrounding taboo and kind of stereotypes in regards to like disabilities and stuff. So thank you so much. And I'm just looking at the group chat here, and there's been some comments, many of support for each of you, but there's been a few comments just regarding having to go to other countries to actually get a diagnosis or to get some sort of support. And I have to say, I'm quite taken aback. I'm quite shocked because this is something, like, I suppose I'm relatively new to this anyway, but I'm so sorry. And I'd love to, if the students who said that would be willing to talk about that a little bit later on, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and about the difficulties that the students in particular in Ireland are facing at the moment when it comes to this stuff. But I would like to just ask you a little bit about, you know, the taboo of talking about this kind of subject, and maybe the stereotypes, or I have terrible trouble phrasing things sometimes, but you know, sometimes words can hurt a lot, and it stops people from getting a diagnosis, or you know, being open about the fact that they might have a disability, or you know, that kind of thing. And possibly people are almost afraid to touch on the subject. And I was wondering, like, if you might want to comment on that, or maybe share a little insight. So we'll head back to Hannah, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question, because when you look at the numbers, to speak about numbers, we're just speaking about numbers there. From the figures we collect every year of how many students are registered with a disability, last year in 2019 figures are the latest that we have. The number of students with disabilities represented in third level education is 15,000 and almost 700, so just almost 16,000 really at this stage, and it's roughly about 6.2% of the general student population. And of course, as Laocin had touched on there as well, that doesn't really represent the total number of students that actually have disabilities in third level either, because that's only people who have registered with the disability office. So there's a number of reasons why people wouldn't, you know, maybe they don't need supports, or maybe they don't have a diagnosis and can't access those supports. So the actual number is a lot larger than even that 6.2%. But if you ask many students, you know, do you know anyone who has a disability, or is there anyone who has a disability in your class, or in any of your lectures, or any of your friends? Most people would say, no, I don't know anybody who has a disability, and they think, you know, it doesn't really have anything to do with me. So, you know, accessibility is not really something that's very relevant to me, because I don't know anyone who has a disability. When, you know, the numbers speaking there, like, you probably do. You know, most disabilities, you know, in third level anyway, a good almost 3/4 of the disabilities are not physical disabilities or not visible disabilities. So things and like autism, dyslexia, you know, any number of things can be someone's disability that you wouldn't necessarily know just by meeting them, just by speaking with someone. So I think that is, it's not necessarily a taboo, but that is why I think a lot of people disengage from the conversation around accessibility or disability, because they don't feel it's relevant for them, or it's something that is important for them to know about. So I think that is like the main barrier and the main reason why the work that I do is trying to re-engage the wider student population with the conversation around disability, because it benefits everyone. Like, disability practice is best practice. So if you're doing something that's accessible, it's usually accessible for, you know, all people, and makes an environment more beneficial for everyone who's involved, not only those who have a disability. So I think the thing that people could really do in order to you know, make an environment more accessible, in terms of whether that's like a social club or like a club or society or something, is by, you know, getting to know what is accessible, what isn't accessible. I don't think anyone is expecting to be a disability expert. You know, I've worked in this sector for almost 4 years. I wouldn't call myself a disability expert. I wouldn't claim to know everything there is to know about disability. But if you have a basic understanding of, you know, maybe if I'm sending out an email, I'll include a line, if anybody needs any accommodations, you can contact this person. Or, you know, if like Laocin said as well, if someone turns up and they want to wear glasses, or if someone doesn't maybe want to get involved and speak in the event, or just wants to kind of hang back, or if someone is acting maybe differently than you would act, you know, don't comment on it, or don't, you know, just accept people that the way they are, and make the environment as open, and be open to changing how you do things as well. I think that is the most the biggest step that you can take, is being open to flexibility, and being open to changing the way that you're doing something in order to make someone else feel like they can access the space. So I think that is a really important thing. And I think that can be challenging in terms of lectures and stuff like that, because it can be seen as, this is the way that we do things, and this is the way it's always been done. And so that's why, you know, it really, for any students here who have disabilities, self-advocacy is something that I think is so important. So it's important to kind of, you know what your rights are, and kind of be able to use that word, because I think it is something that I've seen as well with a lot of students and graduates who I meet, who maybe shy away from the word disability, and wouldn't necessarily connect with that word, or you know, see it as part of their identity. And it doesn't have to be, like, you don't have to identify with that word, but it's a very powerful word that has powerful legislation there to back you up as well. So it's great if you can find a way to connect with that word in order to use the legislation that's there, whether that be to access supports in college, or later on when you're in work, and a work environment, in order to get supports for you to work. So I think that it's not necessarily a taboo, but I think it's the reason why the conversation maybe a lot of people don't engage with, is because they just don't see themselves in it, even though disability is something that will affect all of us at some point in our lives. You know, we all get old. As we get older, you know, we lose our hearing, or we become less mobile. Like there's like loads of different things. Like in your lifetime, everyone will experience some connection to disability. You know, and that's why I think it's more important that we engage in a wider conversation about how to make all of our environments more accessible. And I think that conversation has actually been quite prevalent as well with the whole movement to online spaces, because in my opinion anyway, they can be a lot more accessible very easier. Like, it's very easy to make an online space more accessible. You know, captions can be added, people can turn their camera off so that they don't have to push themselves so far as to get involved by speaking or whatever. So I think there's a lot of conversations to be had. But yeah, that's what I think. I think even having the conversation, or, you know, knowing about accessibility is sometimes the biggest taboo or something, because people disconnect from the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that really, really good insight. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you definitely have me thinking about these things, which is really exciting as well, because I love having a new perspective on things that you know, when you listen to someone and then like a bunch of other questions come into your head, you know, that's a sign that a good point has been raised. So Leesa, can I ask you to go next, please?
Yeah, sorry, can you just repeat the question there, because I've stuff to say, but like I'm not sure, I can't remember the exact wording, or like.
Yeah, sorry, the mute button was a bit fickly there. And apologies if I ever change the structure of the question. I do have them written down, but sometimes words flip around for
You're
me
fine.
as on the call are well aware with me by now.
I just need a buzzword, it's fine, don't worry.
Basically, I want to just kind of get an understanding on basically the taboo kind of, how do I phrase this? Yeah, so basically the idea is that, like, what are the stereotypes of the taboo associated with disabilities? Like, I know I myself, I'm too scared to actually come out and say I have a disability. I feel like I have something along the lines of imposter syndrome. It feels like I don't. Do you know what I mean? And that's a taboo because there's a lot of fear and a lot of, like, you know, people are looking, and I was just actually looking up there out of interest, potential trigger warning here, but just in regards to eating disorders, I was just kind of curious while Hannah was speaking. One thing made me think, is an eating disorder considered a disability? And I was looking up there, and like there was a bit of a hit miss of if it was or if it wasn't, but like that's just one example of kind of, you know, stereotypes to kind of like what is a disability and like how does one define it. But yeah, basically the taboo stereotypes, things that, you know, how we found when we looked up Google and we saw those terrible words that were associated with disability, that kind of idea, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so just actually that's a good starting point, just to start off with what Jessie just said there. And when we were coming up for the name for sharing our strengths, we were trying to think of something, you know, catchy to kind of encapsulate what we want to bring to this month's discussions. And we looked up words on Google about, like, you know, words for disability, basically trying to come up with a catchphrase. And we got a list of what I can only describe as very offensive terms for disability. And as if that wasn't bad enough, not only that, but there was a separate section. So you know the way when you Google something and it comes up like people also search for, underneath that it said offensive terms for disability. So not only were they saying that these terms are okay, but they were also giving people ideas of what were offensive terms for disability, which I think is an absolute disgrace. And I'm sure a lot of you, if not all of you, agree with that. But Jessie and I were thinking maybe of writing some sort of an open letter to Google. So we'll definitely update our social medias and stuff and keep you posted on that if we do decide to do that. But that's just one example. For me personally, growing up as a wheelchair user, especially as a child, I found people were very quick to presume what my abilities or my lack of ability, should I say, were. A lot of the time I was with my mum, I used to have a manual wheelchair, so my mum or my dad would push me in it. And in a lot of those situations where I'd be out in public, I'd get kind of doted on and be like, oh, isn't she a great little girl? Oh, look how cute she is. Now, I'm quite short. I'm 4'11", but, you know, it was obvious I wasn't a baby. I was about 10, 11, 12 when this would still happen. It still happened when I was a teenager as well. And people would be like, oh, isn't she a great little girl? Or the one that really gets me, is what's her name? So they would talk straight over my head. And I think it was just that kind of presumption of, because I was in this wheelchair, that was all there was to me. You know, I could not possibly speak for myself. I couldn't possibly do things for myself. And I think that was another reason as well that I kind of suppressed my disability, because I so badly wanted to just be Leesa, you know, just be me. Because of course I am a person with a disability and I am a wheelchair user, and now I am a disability advocate. But there's so much more to me than that. You know, I'm studying to be a primary school teacher. You know, I'm a normal 23-year-old woman, with normal feelings and emotions and passions that are nothing to do with my disability. And disability, of course, is one of my passions, but it's just one. There's so much more to me. And I think, as kind of has been previously said, I kind of felt like I so badly wanted to cover up my disability that I became about anything but it. And of course, now I've kind of found the power in actually talking about disability and empowerment, and, you know, to find the ability and to find the strength within that. But I do think for a long time, because there was this kind of stigma or taboo attached to my physical disability of, you know, that it was kind of all of me and that was all there was to me, I was so afraid coming into my adult years of being just known as the girl in the wheelchair, or the girl in the walker, or the girl with the physical disability. I so badly didn't want that label attached to me, that I tried to banish it completely. But now I feel like I found a nice balance, that there are people who know me as being a disability advocate, but I would like to think that people know me for being more than that, and know that I can bring more to the table than just that, and that if anything, my disability is a good thing. It's something that brings positive, happy, empowering experiences into my life. And I've kind of just come to the realization that if there are people who I meet in my life who don't like me because of my disability, or who decide to discriminate against me or think that I'm less able because of my disability, then there's more of a disability in their mindset than there ever will be in my legs. And I think that there's a lot of power in realizing that.
I wanted to give the little clap emoji for the end because I just felt that. I was like, yes, yes, queen. Oh, I love that. I want that tattooed on me. Honestly, that is so amazing. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, 100. Yeah, just yet. And I'm so sorry. Last but not least, again, please take the floor.
Okay, so when thinking about taboos and people's feelings about disabilities, one thing which strikes me is some people are scared to even use the word disability, either to describe themselves or other people. I was at a talk at the autism conference for As I Am in 2019, just before founding the society. And I remember someone there was talking about how the disability is like a different ability and how we could use the word diffability. And it just really struck me that like the word disability carries so much weight in society and even in disabled people's head that it's almost like they can't, it's like a bold word or like a curse word. And you have to say, okay, well, they're Laocin with autism and whatever else. But there is no Laocin without bipolar. Now, with that said, I'm obviously more than my 7 disabilities, but I feel like it should be treated like an adjective because it is an adjective. Like, I'm disabled. I don't feel that I should have to be ashamed or to have it labeled as like an illness, because I suppose in some ways you could view it as an illness and you could view it as a bunch of deficits, but equally I could view it as several strengths in areas that are unusual. Like my mathematical skills could be attributed largely to the fact that I have autism and they're very linked together, or my empathy skills could be somewhat attributed to my anxiety. So there's a lot of things that like are just painted in the most bizarrely negative way possible. And it's really weird to me that it has become such a bold word just to be able to say, I'm a disabled person. And then another thing I was going to say was about just person first language versus adjective first language. Not everyone feels the same way as me. So there's obviously a big move, well, not obviously, but there is a big move towards, using the person, like their name, and then with whatever. So I think it's just a respect thing. Like everyone's pronouns and genders are different. So if you meet someone and you become friends with someone who has disabilities or is disabled, you can ask them whether you should refer to them as my friend Aoife, who is in a wheelchair, or not my wheelchair using friend, who is Aoife. So I would always sort of veer on the side of, well, I'm not ashamed, so you're not going to make me be ashamed. But, it's all about individual needs as well. You can't just because I don't like it being painted in a negative way, doesn't mean I can erase the internalized things that other people think. So it's all about, that mutual respect and being willing to meet people halfway, but also to question the way society works at the same time. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that again. That is just such an incredible insight, and you are absolutely right. And I can see all the support in the comments as well, and all the love hearts and everything, because what you're saying is so important and it reigns so true. So honestly, thank you so much for sharing this. Now, I am conscious that we've hit 8 o'clock, so I will ask you one final question before we open to the floor. And that is, and we'll try and keep it, I love the answers, but I suppose we'll reduce them slightly. But what do you feel we can do to help basically raise awareness or work towards supporting students or individuals even with disabilities in Ireland? Like, what can we do to make a change, basically? And again, Hannah, take it away.
Yeah, I suppose a really big question, but I'll try and be as short as I can. I think for people who like students who have disabilities who want to make a difference in their own institutions maybe or something, I think there is a lot of power in really owning the word disability and accessing that, because I think we've already talked about this a lot, but there's a whole group and a whole community of people once you claim the word disability and start seeing yourself more in it, whether that's online or whatever. Like there's so much community there. And I think there's a lot of power behind the word as well in the legislation too. So like I think we spoke a little bit earlier about how we define disability, but disability is defined in our legislation in 5 different categories, and rather it being a defined list, it's actually just categories that are quite broad and fit a lot into them as well. So it's a great piece of legislation, but I suppose to access that legislation you have to use the word disability, and so it's kind of a catch-22 there. So I think for students with disabilities who want to make a difference, it's first beginning to be comfortable with your own identity and where you feel comfortable using the word disability, and then I think something that the wider population can do as well is just to show up when it comes to learning about disability, like look up some things about accessibility and keep it in your mind frame if you're organizing an event or something, to ask for accommodations. So a really simple thing like having a line in an email where people can contact if they have an accessibility requirement or something is a huge thing. And I think for clubs and societies, which is something I think is a huge thing that we like students can do. DCU just released a policy there this week around clubs and societies and an accessibility policy there, and some of the things in there I think are really great, like having a named contact that people can get in contact with. There's some funding there for ISL interpreters if they're needed for an event or something, and there's lots of really practical things that can be done to make spaces more accessible, and I suppose the biggest thing that you can do is just be more knowledgeable about the issues that students with disabilities are facing, and listen to students with disabilities who are around you. And if you are a student with a disability, to speak about your own experience, because I think it's the fact that people don't feel like they know anyone with a disability that means that they don't start a journey of being more accessible. So by you speaking out, if you're comfortable to do so, it can kind of engage someone in the conversation. And I think for such a large group of people, like it is a large group of people, 6.2% of the student population, it can seem like, where are those people? So I think the more opportunities we give for students with disabilities to speak up and include the student voice in everything that we do, then that's how the change will come about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Absolutely. Thank you. Leesa, we'll jump on there.
Cool. So sorry, can you just repeat what the actual thing was again? Like the actual, how to make people more aware, isn't it?
Yeah, basically, like how can we help students basically to encourage, discussion, what we can do to raise supports, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think events like this are so important as well, bringing people together that we can kind of, bounce experiences off each other, bounce ideas off each other, that we know that we're not the only ones with it. Because as I said, for so long, I never had anyone to look up to, not saying that I'm anyone for anyone else to look up to, but, I never had anyone who was in a wheelchair who had the same kind of experience of me as me. And I think it's so important to highlight as well, like somebody else may come on here and have spina bifida and they may have the exact same ability as me, but they won't have the exact same experience as me. They won't experience life and they won't experience the disability in the exact same way. Everyone is different. It's just like any element of life. Disability is no different. It's everyone experiences it in their own personal way. And I think that it's just so important to have these discussions where people can kind of say, well, my disability affects me in this way. And then any one of us might meet somebody in the future who has that same disability and know how to broach the topic a little bit better, because we opened up the conversation, because we met people, because we listened to what their needs are, rather than just kind of using this kind of presumption basis, and kind of rather than just kind of saying, well, I know somebody who has X disability, so this person with X disability must have the exact same needs, because it's not like that. It's not linear, and it's not just a one size fits all. Disability is anything but a one size fits all situation. So I do think that the more we talk about it, the more we share our experiences, the more we open up about how our disability affects us and what we need to live our lives and to, you know, keep up with the rest of the world, then I think that that is one way that we can definitely raise awareness and make disability a more approachable topic.
Again, fantastic. Thank you so much, and a wonderful, wonderful insight into this. I'm loving this, lads. I'm loving this. Laocin, take us home.
Sorry, I was just asking if I was muted or not, and then fixing the fact that I was muted. So what we can do to kind of raise awareness and kind of help accessibilities, I suppose there's many different aspects to accessibility. And first and foremost, I think it's about a cultural shift, and it's about challenging internal biases. And that's a really difficult thing to do, because if it's left to just people in wheelchairs to fight for wheelchair accessible buses, it's kind of, this sounds awful, and it is awful, but it's easy for Bus Éireann to say, well, that's what 0.9% of our bus users. And then it's like, well, maybe it's only 0.9% of your bus users, because only 3 buses have wheelchair accessible like seats. And there's kind of the shift during COVID that I've noticed, which I'm very happy about, is that people are more likely to go out with mobility issues. I don't know if this is an actual thing, but I've kind of noticed it around, that like people are more willing to give each other space and are more willing to kind of realize that they don't know what's going on in people's lives. I think a lot of times people who are outwardly disabled, they get kind of stereotyped a lot and kind of plugged in the same hole as, you know, you must be like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, because that's the only autism I've ever seen in my life. So I think it's a lot about the more of us, the merrier. But if you're not in a position to be able to outwardly talk about disabilities, there's no shame on you for that, because it shouldn't have to come down to individuals. It should come down to a general kind of sense that all humans are human, all humans are worthy, all humans deserve rights. So I guess I'm going to go on a rant about intersectionality now, but I think that it's really vital for people in general, and I don't know how to go about this, but for people in general to view each other as whole, complex people that are kind of enigmatic, that they'll probably never fully get, but that's okay, and that just because they might fit into the label of, say, I don't know, anxiety, having anxiety, doesn't mean that it's social anxiety. It could be performance anxiety. It could be anxiety around catastrophizing events. Like, there are many, many types of things. So you can't just assume from one label that people are carbon copies of each other, because no two people are the same. No two people will experience the same disability the same way. No two people will experience the same kind of gender the same way. There's kind of two people who we can think of here. We can think of people who are disabled themselves, in which case the most radical act of self-love I've ever kind of given to myself is to own the fact that I have various disabilities and to start using the word disabled as an adjective. And I know some people think that using disabled or autistic as an adjective makes it the defining word. But equally, I could just say I'm short. Like, I wouldn't say I'm a person who has shortness. Like, it's just, it automatically, I think, by using it as a tail along, makes it seem like it's with you, but it's not part of you. Whereas, like, all adjectives are equally a part of you. Sorry, I'm doing weird hand things. So that was my really long-winded way of saying, you know, if you're disabled, self-advocacy is a huge thing that you can do for yourself and you can do for others. But if you're not able to do that, then there's no shame on it. It's really difficult, particularly if you have an invisible illness, to open yourself up to stigma. So I would not encourage anyone to do anything that they're uncomfortable with. And then for people without disabilities, they can just learn to listen and kind of generally challenge themselves to view each person they meet as a different person to the other people they know, which people aren't very good at. They like kind of boxes. And while labels are helpful, they're also inherently going to describe thousands of people. So there's no label that fits like 10,000 people that perfectly describes every single one of those 10,000. None of them even really come close. So just kind of, that's my thought.
I wasn't able to unmute there. That was an incredible ending to this discussion. Thank you so much. You are each incredible, inspiring, impeccable individuals, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to be here this evening and to share these really important and well-needed insights to not only our societies and not only to sharing our strengths, but to the amazing individuals who have come from all over Ireland this evening to hear you speak. I am blown away. It's been such an educational, important hour, and I'm so grateful. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to stop the recording, and there's absolutely no pressure for you today, but I'm going to open the floor to questions from members here this evening. And then also I'm hoping that maybe a few of the lovely people who've been commenting this evening might wish to speak and share a little bit of their insights, because I have seen a big exchange. So the recording is now stopped.